The blood-red sun dipped below the horizon as Sophia Palmer stared out across the barren landscape surrounding her homestead, her empty womb aching with the same hollow feeling that had haunted her for 5 long years of marriage. Bentonville, Arizona Territory, 1878, a place where everything seemed to grow except the one thing she yearned for most. Sophia wiped the dust from her cheeks with the back of her hand and adjusted the worn apron tied around her waist. At 26, the doctor in town had already told her what she refused to believe, that she would never bear children. Her husband, Henry Foster, hadn't said much when she'd returned from that appointment 3 months ago, tears streaming down her face. He'd simply held her, his calloused hands gentle against her back, and whispered that they would find a way to make a family one way or another. The supper bell rang from the main house, pulling Sophia from her thoughts. She gathered her skirts and made her way back home, her boots kicking up dust along the worn path. Their homestead wasn't much, a modest 2-room cabin with a small covered porch, but it was theirs, paid for with Henry's sweat and determination after he'd left the cattle drives behind 3 years ago. "Smells good," Henry said as Sophia entered their home. He stood from his chair by the fire, his tall frame casting long shadows across the wooden floor. His dark blonde hair was damp from washing up, and he'd changed out of his work clothes. Sophia smiled, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Just beans and cornbread, nothing special." "Everything you make is special," Henry replied, crossing the room to place a kiss on her forehead. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that comes with years of companionship. Henry told her about the fence he'd mended on the north side of their property, and how he'd traded with Mr. Thompson for a new pair of horseshoes. Sophia nodded and commented in all the right places, but her mind wandered to the Thompson family's newest addition, their 5th child born just last month. "I was thinking," Henry said, setting down his fork, "that maybe we could go into town this weekend. Get some supplies, maybe have dinner at that new place that opened up." Sophia looked up, surprised. They rarely went into Bentonville except for necessities. "What's the occasion?" Henry shrugged, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "No occasion, just thought it would be nice." "All right," Sophia agreed, wondering what her husband was planning. The next morning, Sophia woke to an empty bed and the sound of hammering outside. She dressed quickly and stepped out onto the porch, shielding her eyes against the early morning sun. Henry was behind the house, driving wooden stakes into the ground in a large, rectangular pattern. "Henry Foster, what on earth are you doing?" she called, making her way toward him. Henry turned, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cool morning air. "Morning, sweetheart." "Just getting an early start." "On what?" Sophia asked, approaching the area he had staked out. It was at least 20 feet by 30 feet on the flat ground behind their house. "Thought we could use a garden," Henry replied, hammering another stake into the hard earth. "A big one." Sophia frowned, looking at the dry, rocky soil. "Henry, we've tried gardens before. Nothing grows well here except for those few herbs by the kitchen window." Henry straightened, resting the hammer against his leg. His blue eyes were bright with determination. "This one will be different. I've been talking to that new fellow in town, Mr. Ramirez. He comes from a place in Mexico where they grow all sorts of things in dry conditions. He's given me some ideas." "Henry." Sophia started, but the hope in his eyes made her pause. "I know it won't replace what we can't have," he said quietly, closing the distance between them. "But I thought maybe you'd like something of your own to nurture and watch grow." Tears pricked at Sophia's eyes. She reached up to touch his face, rough with morning stubble. "You're a good man, Henry Foster," he leaned into her touch. "I just want to see you smile again, Soph, a real smile." "And you think vegetables will do that?" she asked, a hint of teasing in her voice despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Not just vegetables," he replied, gesturing to the layout. "Flowers, too, and fruit trees along the back. I've been saving up, and I've got some plans for irrigation that Mr. Ramirez helped me draw up." Sophia looked at the staked-out area with new eyes, trying to imagine it filled with growing things instead of dust and rocks. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had building a life out here when they'd first arrived. "It's a lot of work," she said. Henry grinned, his face lighting up with boyish enthusiasm. Good thing I'm not afraid of hard work. He worked all day, digging out rocks and breaking up the hard soil. Sophia brought him water and sandwiches, watching as the outline of the garden took shape. By evening, Henry had cleared about a quarter of the area and built a simple fence around the perimeter to keep out rabbits and other desert creatures. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Henry joined Sophia on the porch. His clothes were covered in dust, and his hands were blistered from the shovel, but there was a satisfaction in his eyes that she hadn't seen in a long time. "Why now?" Sophia asked as they sat side by side on the porch steps. "Why the garden?" Henry was quiet for a moment, watching the colors fade from the horizon. "Remember when we first got married and you told me about your ma's garden back in Missouri? How everything grew so tall and green and you'd help her pick berries in the summer?" Sophia nodded, the memory bittersweet. Her parents had both passed from influenza the winter before she'd met Henry. "I remember. You looked so happy talking about it," Henry continued, "and I thought maybe a garden would give you some of that happiness back." Sophia leaned against his shoulder, mindless of the dust. "The doctor in town said I should accept it, that some women just aren't meant to be mothers." Henry's arm came around her, pulling her close. "That doctor doesn't know everything, and being a mother isn't just about having babies, it's about caring and nurturing and loving." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "And you've got more love in your heart than anyone I've ever known, Sophia Palmer Foster." Over the next 2 weeks, Henry worked on the garden every spare moment he had. He hauled in rich soil from the riverbed 5 miles away, mixed it with manure from their 2 horses, and created raised beds throughout the garden plot. He installed a clever system of irrigation ditches that connected to their well pump, allowing water to flow efficiently to each section of the garden. Sophia found herself increasingly drawn to the project. She began researching which plants might thrive in their harsh climate, and made lists of seeds they would need to purchase. In the evenings, they would sit at their small kitchen table, planning the layout of the garden vegetables in one section, flowers in another, and a small orchard of drought-resistant fruit trees along the back wall. "We'll need to get to town soon for those seeds," Sophia said one evening, looking up from her notebook, "if we want to get them in the ground before the spring rains." Henry nodded, sipping his coffee. "I was thinking we could go tomorrow. I've got most of the beds prepared now." The next morning, they hitched up their wagon and made the hour-long journey into Bentonville. The town had grown considerably in the 5 years since they'd settled in the area. What had once been little more than a trading post now boasted a proper main street with a general store, a bank, 2 saloons, a hotel, and even a small dressmaker's shop. Their first stop was the general store where Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, greeted them warmly. "The Fosters. Don't often see both of you in town together," he said, coming around the counter to shake Henry's hand. "Special occasion," Henry replied with a smile. "We're here for garden supplies." Mr. Peterson raised his bushy eyebrows. "Garden supplies in this climate, good luck to you." "We've got a system," Sophia said, pulling out her list. "We need these seeds if you have them, and any gardening tools you might have in stock." Mr. Peterson adjusted his spectacles and examined the list. "I've got most of these. Had a shipment come in from back east last week." The Alvarez family ordered some special seeds that never got picked up, Mexican varieties, supposed to be good for dry conditions. "We'll take those too," Henry said quickly, excitement evident in his voice. While Mr. Peterson gathered their supplies, the bell above the door jingled, and Samuel Walker entered the store. He was a tall man with a perpetual scowl who owned the largest cattle ranch in the county. He nodded curtly to Henry and ignored Sophia completely. "Peterson," Walker called, "need ammunition for my men. We've got coyote problems again." "Be with you in a minute, Mr. Walker," Peterson replied, continuing to package up the Foster's seeds. Walker frowned, clearly unaccustomed to waiting. His gaze fell on the collection of seed packets on the counter. "What's all this? Someone planning a garden party?" he asked with a sneer. "Just some gardening supplies," Henry answered evenly. He and Walker had never gotten along, especially after Henry had refused to sell their small parcel of land to the rancher last year. Walker snorted. Gardening, in this God-forsaken desert, waste of time and water if you ask me. He looked directly at Sophia for the first time. Shouldn't you be focusing on more important matters, like giving your husband some children to inherit his land? The store went quiet. Sophia felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. Henry stepped forward, his voice low and dangerous. You owe my wife an apology, Walker. Walker smirked. Just stating facts, Foster. A woman's job is to bear children. If she can't do that, what good is she? Henry's hands curled into fists at his sides, and Sophia could see the muscle in his jaw working as he struggled to maintain his composure. Henry, Sophia said quietly, placing a hand on his arm. It's not worth it. Walker chuckled, seemingly pleased with the reaction he'd provoked. Listen to your barren wife, Foster. Wouldn't want to see you get hurt. Mr. Peterson quickly intervened, stepping between the two men. That's enough, Mr. Walker. I won't have that kind of talk in my store, Walker shrugged, turning his attention back to the shopkeeper. My ammunition, Peterson, now. The tension in the store remained thick as Mr. Peterson hurriedly finished with the Foster's order before attending to Walker. Sophia kept her hand firmly on Henry's arm, feeling the tremors of his contained anger beneath her fingers. Once outside, Henry loaded their purchases into the wagon, his movements sharp and angry. I should have knocked his teeth in. Sophia climbed onto the wagon seat. And then what? Get arrested, or worse, give him a reason to make our lives even more difficult. She shook her head. He's not worth it, Henry sighed, joining her on the seat and taking up the reins. His words hurt you, I could see it in your eyes. Sophia looked down at her hands, folded in her lap. They were nothing I haven't thought myself, she admitted quietly. Henry's expression softened. He set the reins down and turned to face her fully. Sophia, look at me. When she did, he continued, you are everything to me, everything, whether we have children or not, that will never change. Do you understand? Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but she nodded. I understand. Good, Henry said, picking up the reins again. Now, let's go home and start our garden. The ride home was quiet, both lost in their thoughts. As they approached their property, Sophia noticed a wagon parked outside their house. A man stood on their porch, his hat in his hands. Who's that? She asked, squinting against the sun. Henry frowned. Looks like Jose Ramirez. As they pulled up to the house, Mr. Ramirez stepped forward to greet them. He was a middle-aged Mexican man with kind eyes and a gentle manner. Mr. Foster, Mrs. Foster, he said, nodding to each of them. I hope you don't mind me waiting for you. I heard in town you were building a garden, and I thought perhaps I could offer some assistance. Henry smiled, his earlier tension fading. That's mighty kind of you, Mr. Ramirez. We could certainly use your expertise. Please call me Jose, the man replied, and it would be my pleasure. My family has been growing things in dry places for generations. Sophia invited Jose inside for coffee while Henry unloaded their purchases. As she prepared the drink, Jose explained that he had brought them some cuttings from his own garden, herbs and flowers that were particularly well suited to the desert climate. My wife, she would want you to have these, Jose said, a shadow crossing his face. She passed last winter, but her garden still blooms. It would please her to know her plants are helping another family. I'm so sorry for your loss, Sophia said, placing a comforting hand on the man's arm. Jose nodded in acknowledgement. Life continues, even after great sorrow. My Maria always said that gardens remind us of this truth. When Henry joined them, Jose began explaining the best techniques for desert gardening, how to create shade for sensitive plants, how to conserve water through mulching, and which plants would naturally repel harmful insects. The most important thing, Jose emphasized, is to work with the land, not against it. The desert has its own beauty and its own way of nurturing life. You must learn to see it. They spent the afternoon with Jose, touring the garden area and discussing the layout. By the time he left, promising to return in a few days with more cuttings, Sophia felt a spark of genuine excitement about the project. Perhaps this garden could actually thrive despite the harsh conditions. Over the next several weeks, the garden began to take shape. Henry completed the irrigation system, and they planted their first seeds: corn, beans, squash, and tomatoes in the vegetable section, marigolds, zinnias, and desert wildflowers in the flower beds. Jose visited regularly, bringing more plants and sharing his knowledge. To Sophia's surprise, the seeds sprouted quickly in the enriched soil. Each morning, she would rush out to check their progress, marveling at the tiny green shoots pushing up through the earth. She began keeping a journal, recording the growth of each plant and noting which varieties seemed to thrive and which struggled. One evening in late April, after a long day of weeding and watering, Sophia and Henry sat on a bench he had built along one edge of the garden. The air was filled with the sweet scent of the evening primroses that had just begun to open as the sun set. "It's really working," Sophia said, wonder in her voice as she gazed at the rows of plants. "They're actually growing," Henry smiled, taking her hand in his. "Of course they are." "They have you looking after them." Sophia leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you for this, Henry. I never thought." She paused, emotion tightening her throat. "What is it, love?" he prompted gently. "I never thought I could feel this way again, this sense of purpose, of creating something. After the doctor said I couldn't have children, it was like a part of me died. But this," she gestured to the garden, "this has brought something back to life." Henry's arm tightened around her. "That's all I wanted," he said, his voice husky with emotion. "To see that light in your eyes again." As spring turned to summer, the garden flourished beyond their wildest expectations. The vegetable plants grew tall and strong, the flowers bloomed in vibrant colors, and even the young fruit trees showed promise. Word spread throughout the area about the Fosters' miraculous garden, and people began to visit, eager to see the oasis they'd created in the desert. Jose became a regular fixture at their homestead, often bringing his teenage son, Miguel, who was fascinated by the irrigation system Henry had designed. Other neighbors started coming too, bringing plants to contribute or seeking advice for their own garden attempts. One hot July afternoon, Sophia was harvesting tomatoes when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Looking up, she saw Samuel Walker and two of his ranch hands riding toward the house. She straightened, wiping her hands on her apron as Henry emerged from the barn, alerted by the visitors. Walker dismounted, his gaze moving from Henry to Sophia, then sweeping across the flourishing garden with unconcealed surprise. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "The rumors were true." "What can we do for you, Walker?" Henry asked, his tone neutral but his stance wary. Walker removed his hat, running a hand through his graying hair. "Heard about your garden from some of my men, didn't believe it myself, had to come see." He took a few steps closer to the garden, examining the thriving plants. "How'd you manage this in this God-forsaken desert?" "Hard work and good advice," Henry replied. "Is that all you came for?" Walker shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, no," he glanced at his men, who remained mounted. "There's been talk of drought coming, bad one. My cattle need water. I want to discuss purchasing water rights to the creek that runs through the northeast corner of your property." Henry crossed his arms. "That creek is what feeds our well. Without it, we couldn't maintain the garden or our livestock." "I'm prepared to pay generously," Walker insisted. "More than fair market value." "The answer is no," Henry said firmly. "We need that water." Walker's face darkened. "Don't be a fool, Foster. You've got, what, 5 acres? I've got 5,000 head of cattle. You do the math on what's more important to this county." "Our land is important to us," Sophia interjected, stepping forward to stand beside her husband. "And the garden provides food not just for us, but for several families in the area now." Walker's gaze shifted to her, surprise evident in his expression. The last time they had encountered each other, she had been meek and wounded by his cruel words. Now she stood tall, confidence radiating from her. "Mrs. Foster," Walker said, his tone slightly less hostile, "I understand your attachment to your project here, but business is business. And water is going to become very valuable very soon. Then I suggest you start looking elsewhere for it," Henry replied, "because our answer is still no." Walker's jaw tightened. He looked once more at the garden, his expression unreadable. "You might regret that decision," he said finally, replacing his hat. When times get hard, people remember who their friends are. With that, he mounted his horse and rode away, his men following closely behind. That man never brings anything but trouble, Sophia said, watching them disappear in a cloud of dust. Henry nodded, his expression grave. And I don't like the sound of this drought he's predicting. We should prepare just in case. The next day, Henry began work on a series of rainwater collection barrels around the property, while Sophia focused on preserving as much of their garden produce as possible. They worked from dawn until dusk, driven by a shared sense of urgency. As July turned to August, the heat became increasingly oppressive. The creek that fed their well slowed to a trickle, and the skies remained stubbornly clear, offering no hint of rain. The garden required more and more water to keep the plants alive in the scorching temperatures. "We need to conserve more," Henry said one evening as they inspected the garden. Despite their efforts, some of the more delicate plants were beginning to wilt in the relentless heat. "The well's getting lower every day." Sophia nodded, her heart heavy. She had become deeply attached to each plant, nurturing them through their growth. The thought of losing any of them felt like a personal failure. "We could focus on saving the fruit trees and the hardier vegetables," she suggested. "Let some of the flowers go." Henry wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I know how much you love those flowers." Sophia leaned into his embrace. "They'll come back next year, and the vegetables are feeding people now." That night, as they lay in bed, the air hot and still despite the open windows, Henry's voice came through the darkness. "I've been thinking, Soph." "About what?" she murmured, already half asleep. "About Walker's warning. What if the drought gets worse? What if our well runs dry completely?" Sophia rolled over to face him, though she could barely make out his features in the darkness. "Then we'll figure something out. We always do." Henry was quiet for a long moment. "I don't want you to suffer because of my stubbornness." "If things get bad enough, maybe we should consider Walker's offer." Sophia reached out to touch his face. "Henry Foster, you listen to me. That garden isn't just plants, it's hope, it's life, it's everything we've built together. We're not giving up on it because some cattle barren threatens us with a drought that might not even come." Henry caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. "When did you get to be so fierce?" Sophia laughed softly. "I learned it from my husband. He's a very determined man, you know." 2 days later, Jose arrived at their homestead with a worried expression. "The well at my place has gone dry," he announced without preamble, "and I've heard of 3 others in the area suffering the same fate." Henry's face grew serious. "Our creek is down to almost nothing." "The well's holding for now, but I don't know for how much longer." Jose nodded grimly. "I feared as much. This is why I came. My son and I, we have discovered something that might help." He gestured to Miguel, who was unloading several large clay pots from their wagon. "These are Allah's traditional Mexican water jars. You bury them in the soil near your plants with just the neck exposed, then fill them with water. The clay allows the water to seep out slowly, directly to the roots. It uses much less water than surface watering." Sophia examined one of the pots with interest. "And this really works. For centuries," Jose confirmed. "My ancestors used this method long before the Spanish arrived. It will not save everything, but it might help you preserve the most important plants until the rains come." With Jose and Miguel's help, they spent the day burying the olives throughout the garden, prioritizing the fruit trees and the vegetable plants that were still producing. By evening, the system was in place, and they had used significantly less water than their usual irrigation method. As they shared a simple meal with Jose and Miguel before they departed, Sophia noticed dark clouds gathering on the horizon. "Could it be?" she asked, hope rising in her chest. Jose followed her gaze and smiled. "Perhaps the rain gods have heard our prayers." But the clouds passed without delivering the desperately needed rain, and the drought tightened its grip on the land. Day after day, the sun beat down mercilessly, and the ground grew increasingly parched. Despite their water conservation efforts, the garden began to suffer. The flowers were the first to go, their vibrant blossoms withering in the heat. Sophia spent hours each day carefully tending the remaining plants, using water sparingly and providing shade where possible. She refused to give up, even as neighboring families abandoned their garden attempts and focused solely on survival. One particularly hot afternoon, as Sophia was checking the water level in the Alas, she heard a commotion from the direction of their small barn. She hurried around the house to find Henry confronting 3 of Walker's men who stood beside the creek bed with shovels in their hands. "What do you think you're doing?" Henry demanded, his voice hard with anger. The lead man, a grizzled cowboy with a weathered face, spat on the ground. "Mr. Walker's orders. We're diverting this creek to feed into the main channel that runs through his property." "This is our land," Henry said, stepping closer to the men, "and that creek feeds our well. You have no right." "We've got every right," another of the men replied, brandishing a piece of paper. "County Water Rights Commission approved it this morning. With the drought emergency, they're prioritizing livestock water needs." Henry snatched the paper from the man's hand, his face growing pale as he read. "This can't be legal. It's signed by Judge Harmon himself," the first man said with a smirk. "So unless you want to find yourself on the wrong side of the law, I suggest you step aside and let us do our job." Sophia moved to Henry's side, taking the paper from his trembling hands. The document appeared official with multiple signatures and a county seal. "There must be some mistake," she said. "They can't just take our water." "Apparently they can," Henry said grimly, "at least until the drought emergency is lifted. But our garden," Sophia whispered, her heart sinking. "Our well." The men watched their exchange with indifference, leaning on their shovels. "Look," the leader said, his tone slightly less hostile, "it's nothing personal. We're just following orders. Mr. Walker said to tell you his offer to buy water rights still stands. You wouldn't be in this situation if you'd been reasonable." Henry's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Get off my land, now." The men exchanged glances, then shrugged. "We'll be back tomorrow with the proper equipment," the leader said, "and you'd best not interfere." With that, they mounted their horses and rode away. As soon as they were out of sight, Henry turned to Sophia, his expression anguished. "I'm so sorry, Soph. I should have seen this coming. Walker's got the judge in his pocket. Everyone knows that." Sophia stared at the creek bed, already nearly dry from the drought. Without it feeding their well, the garden would be doomed. All their hard work, all the life they'd nurtured, would wither and die under the merciless sun. "We'll fight this," she said with sudden determination. "There must be a way." Henry ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every line of his body. "How? The county's sided with Walker, and in a drought, cattle do take precedence over gardens in the eyes of the law." Sophia thought for a moment, then looked up at her husband with renewed purpose. "Then we need to prove our garden is more than just a personal project, that it benefits the community." They rode into town the next morning, stopping first at Jose's home to explain the situation. The older man listened gravely, then nodded. "I will gather others who have benefited from your garden. Meet us at the town hall at noon." By the time they reached Bentonville, word had already spread about Walker's plan to divert the creek. The town was abuzz with gossip, and several people stopped the Fosters on the street to express their concern. At the town hall, they found Judge Harmon, a portly man with shrewd eyes, conducting official business. Samuel Walker sat in the front row, a satisfied smile playing at his lips when the Fosters entered. "Judge Harmon," Henry called, approaching the front of the room. "We need to speak with you about the water diversion order you signed." The judge peered at them over his spectacles. "Mr. Foster, Mrs. Foster, I'm in the middle of county business. If you wish to file a formal complaint, you can do so with the clerk." "This can't wait," Sophia said firmly, stepping forward. "You've authorized the destruction of something vital to this community without even allowing us to present our case." Walker stood, his tall frame imposing. "Now see here, Judge, these people are just upset because their little hobby garden might suffer. We're talking about thousands of cattle that provide livelihoods for dozens of families in this county." Just then, the doors to the town hall opened, and Jose entered, followed by at least 20 other townspeople. They filed in quietly, filling the remaining seats and lining the walls. Judge Harmon blinked in surprise. "What is the meaning of this?" Jose stepped forward, his manner respectful but determined. "We have come to speak on behalf of the Foster Garden, Your Honor. It is more than a hobby, as Mr. Walker suggests. It has become a source of fresh food for many families in Bentonville during these difficult times." One by one, people stood to testify how the garden had helped them, providing vegetables when their own crops failed, offering cuttings and seeds to start their own gardens, teaching techniques for growing food in the harsh desert environment. Mrs. Thompson, the mother of 5 whose newest baby had once caused Sophia such pain, stood with her infant in her arms. "My children have fresh vegetables because of Mrs. Foster's generosity. Before their garden, my youngest 2 had never tasted a fresh tomato." Even Mr. Peterson from the general store spoke up. "The Fosters have been sharing their knowledge with anyone who asks. Because of them, at least a dozen families in town have started small gardens of their own. In a drought like this, that local food production becomes even more important." Throughout the testimonies, Judge Harmon listened with growing interest while Walker's expression darkened. When the last person had spoken, the judge removed his spectacles and polished them thoughtfully. "This is unexpected," he admitted. "When I signed the water diversion order, I was under the impression that we were simply talking about a private garden of little consequence." "It's still just a garden," Walker interjected. "My cattle are important, yes," the judge interrupted, raising a hand. "But so is food security for our citizens." He turned to Henry and Sophia. "How much water does your garden actually require? Could a compromise be reached?" Before Henry could respond, the doors opened once more and an elderly man entered, leaning heavily on a cane. It was old Joe Blackburn, a former surveyor who had lived in the territory longer than anyone could remember. "Beggin' your pardon, Judge," Blackburn said, his voice quavering with age but clear in the suddenly quiet room. "But I believe I might have information pertinent to this matter." Judge Harmon nodded for him to continue. "Been listening to the talk around town," Blackburn said, making his way slowly to the front of the room. "And it occurs to me that nobody's mentioned the underground spring." Walker frowned. "What spring?" "The one that runs beneath the Foster property," Blackburn replied. "Mapped it myself 40 years ago when the government was surveying the territory. It's what feeds their creek and well." He pulled a yellowed map from inside his jacket. "According to the original water rights established then, that spring water belongs to the property owner in perpetuity, drought or no drought." The judge examined the map carefully, then looked up at Walker. "He's right. The spring water rights are specifically excluded from emergency drought provisions." Walker's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. An ancient map and a senile old man's memory can't take precedence over the needs of the entire county." "The law is the law, Mr. Walker," Judge Harmon said firmly. "And it appears I signed the diversion order without all the facts. Consider it rescinded, effective immediately." He banged his gavel, making the decision official. A cheer went up from the assembled townspeople. Sophia felt tears of relief spring to her eyes as Henry wrapped his arms around her, lifting her off her feet in a joyful embrace. Walker stormed out, followed by his men, but not before shooting the Fosters a venomous look that promised this wasn't over. As they made their way home that afternoon, surrounded by well-wishers, Sophia felt a profound sense of belonging that she had never experienced before. The garden, meant to be a private sanctuary to heal her wounded heart, had somehow grown into something much larger, a community resource, a teaching tool, a source of hope in difficult times. "I never expected all those people to stand up for us," she said to Henry as they approached their homestead. "To stand up for the garden," Henry smiled, reaching over to take her hand. "You've given them something valuable, Soph, not just vegetables, but knowledge, hope. A sense that they can create something beautiful even in harsh conditions." Sophia's gaze drifted to the garden, its green expanse a stark contrast to the brown landscape surrounding it. Despite the drought, despite Walker's interference, it had survived just as she had survived her own personal drought of the spirit. That evening, as they walked among the plants, checking the olives and pruning away dead leaves, dark clouds gathered once more on the horizon. This time they didn't drift away but continued to build, towering into the sky. Could it be? Sophia breathed, hardly daring to hope, as if in answer a low rumble of thunder sounded in the distance. The air grew heavy with moisture and a cool breeze stirred the leaves of the garden plants. Quick, Henry said, a grin spreading across his face. Let's get the rain barrels ready. They worked together, positioning containers to catch every precious drop. As the first fat raindrops began to fall, Sophia turned her face to the sky, letting the water splash against her skin. Henry grabbed her by the waist, spinning her in a circle as the rain came down harder, turning the dusty ground to mud beneath their feet. Laughing, they danced in the downpour, soaked to the skin but filled with joy. The garden seemed to come alive around them, the plants reaching upward as if to embrace the life-giving water. Later, as they sat on the porch watching the steady rain, Henry pulled Sophia close against his side. "You know," he said softly, "I was thinking about what Jose's wife said about gardens reminding us that life continues even after great sorrow." Sophia nodded, understanding where his thoughts were leading. "The gardens taught me that there are many ways to nurture life, to create something meaningful." Henry kissed her temple, his lips lingering against her skin. "I was thinking, when the drought's over and things settle down, maybe we could talk to the orphanage in Tucson. I hear they're always looking for good homes for children who have lost their parents." Sophia turned to look at him, her heart swelling with emotion. "You mean adoption?" Henry nodded, a tender smile lighting his eyes. "If you want to, we've got this home, this garden, all this love to give. Seems a shame not to share it." Tears mingled with raindrops on Sophia's cheeks as she threw her arms around her husband's neck. "Yes," she whispered against his skin. "Oh yes." As autumn approached, the rains continued intermittently, breaking the drought's hold on the land. The garden flourished, producing a bountiful harvest that Sophia and Henry shared generously with their neighbors. Samuel Walker kept his distance, though they occasionally saw his men watching their property from a distance. "He's still angry," Henry remarked one day as they spotted a rider observing them from the ridgeline. "But I think even he's realized he can't fight the entire town." Sophia nodded, her hands busy with harvesting the last of the season's tomatoes. "Or perhaps he's realized there are some things money can't buy." In late September, they made the journey to Tucson, hearts filled with nervous anticipation. The orphanage was a simple adobe building on the outskirts of the city, home to 23 children of various ages who had lost their parents to disease, accidents, or the violence that sometimes plagued the frontier. Sister Margaret, the nun who ran the orphanage, welcomed them warmly. "Mr. Peterson from Bentonville wrote to us about you," she explained as she led them through the building. "He spoke very highly of your character and your garden." She smiled at the last word as if understanding its significance. As they toured the orphanage, meeting the children who eyed them with cautious curiosity, Sophia felt an unexpected calm settle over her. These children needed love, stability, a place to grow just as her plants did. She could provide that, she realized, she and Henry together. In a small room at the back of the building, a girl of about 6 sat alone, reading a worn book. Her dark hair fell in waves around a solemn face, and she looked up with serious brown eyes as they entered. "This is Sarah," Sister Margaret said softly. "She's been with us for nearly a year now. Her parents were killed in a stagecoach robbery." Something in the child's quiet dignity, in the way she clutched her book like a shield, touched Sophia's heart. She knelt down to the girl's level, smiling gently. "Hello, Sarah. That looks like an interesting book. Do you like to read?" The girl nodded, her expression guarded. "It's about plants," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "how they grow and change." Sophia's heart skipped a beat. She glanced up at Henry, who was watching the exchange with tender eyes. "My husband and I have a garden," she told Sarah. "All kinds of plants growing together. Would you like to hear about it?" Sarah nodded again, a flicker of interest lighting her solemn face. For the next hour, Sophia sat with Sarah, describing the garden in detail, the vegetables and flowers, the fruit trees beginning to take root, the clever irrigation system Henry had designed. As she spoke, the girl gradually moved closer, her initial wariness giving way to genuine curiosity. "Could I see it someday?" Sarah asked finally, looking up at Sophia with hope in her eyes. "We were hoping," Henry said, joining them on the floor, "that you might like to come live with us, to help us tend the garden and make it grow even more beautiful." Sarah's eyes widened. "You mean?" "Forever, forever," Sophia confirmed, her throat tight with emotion. "If you'd like that." The girl was quiet for a long moment, studying their faces as if searching for signs of deception. Then, with a decisiveness that belied her young age, she nodded. "I would like to see the garden." 2 weeks later, after completing the necessary paperwork and preparations, they brought Sarah home to Bentonville. The girl sat between them on the wagon seat, her few possessions packed in a small trunk in the back, her eyes wide as she took in the landscape. As they crested the final hill before their homestead, the garden came into view, a vibrant rectangle of green against the desert backdrop, the late afternoon sun gilding the plants with golden light. "Is that it?" Sarah gasped, sitting up straighter. "The garden." "That's it," Henry confirmed with a smile. "Home." When they reached the house, Sarah barely waited for the wagon to stop before scrambling down, eager to explore the garden. Sophia and Henry followed more slowly, watching as the girl moved carefully between the rows, touching leaves and flowers with gentle fingers. "It's so big," she marveled, looking back at them with shining eyes. "And so alive. Would you like to help me pick some vegetables for dinner?" Sophia asked, joining her beside a row of carrots. Sarah nodded eagerly, and together they harvested carrots, onions, and late-season squash for the evening meal. As they worked, Sophia showed the girl how to identify ripe vegetables and explained how each plant had different needs just like people. That night, after a simple but satisfying meal, Henry built a fire in the hearth despite the mild temperature. Sarah sat cross-legged on the rug before it, her face illuminated by the flickering flames as she examined a collection of seeds Sophia had given her. "Tomorrow we can plant these in your very own section of the garden," Sophia explained, sitting beside the girl. "You can decide what you want to grow there." Sarah looked up, her expression serious. "Will they grow even though it's almost winter?" Henry chuckled, joining them on the rug. "Some things will, others will save for spring planting. The garden changes with the seasons, just like everything in nature." Sarah considered this, rolling a bean seed between her small fingers. "My mama used to have flowers," she said quietly, before she died. "Not a big garden like this, just some flowers in pots. She let me water them sometimes." Sophia's heart ached at the wistful tone in the child's voice. Carefully, she put an arm around Sarah's thin shoulders. "Would you like to grow flowers in your garden section? We can find some that will bloom even in winter." Sarah leaned slightly into Sophia's embrace, the first real sign of trust she'd shown. "Can I grow vegetables too, like the ones we ate for dinner?" "You can grow anything you want," Henry assured her. "That's the wonderful thing about having your own garden, you get to decide what grows there." Later, after they'd tucked Sarah into bed in the small room they'd prepared for her, Sophia and Henry stood in the doorway, watching the steady rise and fall of the girl's chest as she slept. "Do you think she'll be happy here?" Sophia whispered, leaning against her husband. Henry pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "I think she's already started to put down roots, just like our garden. The rest will come with time and care." Sophia nodded, a sense of profound gratitude washing over her. A year ago, she had been consumed by grief over what she couldn't have, unable to see the possibilities that surrounded her. Now, her heart felt full to bursting with all that she'd been given: a thriving garden, a supportive community, a child to nurture, and a husband who had seen her potential to grow even when she couldn't see it herself. As winter settled over Bentonville, the garden entered a new phase. Many of the summer plants died back, but winter vegetables, kale, Brussels sprouts, carrots continued to thrive. Sarah's special garden plot, situated in a sunny, protected corner, sprouted winter pansies and early bulbs alongside rows of lettuce and radishes that she tended with diligent care. The girl blossomed along with her plants, gradually letting down her guard and allowing herself to become part of the family. She still had moments of sadness, nights when she cried for her lost parents, but increasingly there were also moments of joy: her laughter when Henry taught her to ride their gentle mare, her proud smile when she mastered a new gardening technique, her quiet contentment as she helped Sophia preserve the last of the fall harvest. On a crisp December morning, as they worked together in the garden, Sarah looked up from the bed of winter greens she was weeding. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," Sophia replied, setting down her pruning shears. "Anything at all." The girl hesitated, her fingers nervously pleating the fabric of her apron. "Would it be all right if I called you Mama and Mr. Henry Papa?" Her voice grew softer with each word. "Not if you don't want me to, I just thought maybe." Sophia's heart seemed to stop, then restart with a rush of emotion so powerful it left her breathless. She crossed the space between them and knelt beside Sarah, heedless of the muddy ground soaking through her skirt. "Nothing in the world would make me happier," she said, her voice thick with tears. "Nothing at all." Sarah's face lit up with relief and happiness. "Really, really and truly," Sophia assured her, opening her arms. The girl flew into her embrace, small arms wrapping tightly around Sophia's neck. Over Sarah's shoulder, Sophia saw Henry approaching from the barn, his expression curious at the scene before him. "What's this?" he asked, kneeling beside them. Sarah turned to him, her face shining. "I asked if I could call you Papa and her Mama, and she said yes. Is that all right with you too?" Henry's eyes met Sophia's over the child's head, his own gaze suspiciously bright. "That's more than all right," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "That's perfect." As they walked back to the house together, Sarah between them holding both their hands, Sophia felt a sense of completion she had never expected to experience. The path to motherhood had not been the one she'd imagined, but perhaps that made it all the more precious. Spring arrived with a riot of new growth, both in the garden and in their family life. Sarah, now officially their daughter following a visit from the county judge, had taken to school with the same enthusiasm she showed for gardening. She made friends quickly, her initial shyness giving way to a quiet confidence that made Sophia's heart swell with pride. The garden expanded again, with Henry adding a small greenhouse built from salvaged windows and lumber. It allowed them to start seedlings earlier and extend their growing season on both ends, increasing the variety of what they could produce. Word of the Foster Garden had spread beyond Bentonville, bringing visitors from as far away as Tucson and Phoenix to see what they had accomplished in the desert. Sophia found herself teaching informal classes on desert gardening techniques, sharing the knowledge she and Henry had gained through experience and Jose's guidance. On a warm April evening, as they sat on the porch watching Sarah chase fireflies in the twilight, Henry reached for Sophia's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "A dangerous pastime," Sophia teased, leaning against his shoulder. Henry chuckled. "Maybe so, but I've been thinking about the future, about expanding." Sophia looked up at him curiously. "The garden." "The family," Henry clarified. "Sarah's thriving here, and there are so many more children at that orphanage, children who need a home, a family." Sophia's heart quickened. "You want to adopt another child?" Henry nodded, his expression earnest. "If you do, the house is small, but we could add on. And the garden produces more than enough to feed a larger family." Sophia thought of the lonely children they had seen at the orphanage, of the love that had grown in her heart for Sarah, of the way their family had flourished just like their garden. "Yes," she said simply, "I'd like that very much." 6 months later, they welcomed 8-year-old Thomas and his 4-year-old sister, Emma, into their home. The children, orphaned by a fire that had claimed their parents and their home in Flagstaff, were quiet and wary at first, clinging to each other like survivors of a shipwreck. But Sarah, now confident in her place in the family, took them under her wing, showing them the garden, introducing them to her favorite books, assuring them that Mama and Papa had enough love for all of them. By the following spring, the Foster homestead had transformed yet again. Henry had built an addition to the house, doubling its size to accommodate their growing family. The garden expanded as well, with each child having their own special plot to tend as well as responsibilities in the main garden areas. Thomas, with his natural affinity for building things, worked alongside Henry creating trellises, cold frames, and other structures to support the plants. Emma, despite her young age, proved to have a remarkable memory for plant names and uses, often surprising them with her knowledge. And Sarah, their first garden child, had developed a special talent for coaxing even the most reluctant seeds into abundant growth. On Sarah's 8th birthday, as they celebrated with a picnic in the garden surrounded by blooming flowers and ripening vegetables, Sophia watched her family with a heart so full it seemed impossible it wouldn't burst. Henry, his face tanned from working outdoors, was helping Thomas set up a game of horseshoes. Emma sat nearby, carefully arranging wildflowers into a crown for Sarah, who was laughing at something José's son Miguel had said as he presented her with a hand-carved wooden plant marker for her garden plot. "You have created something beautiful here," José said quietly, joining Sophia where she stood at the edge of the gathering. "Something that will continue to grow and bear fruit for many years to come." Sophia nodded, unable to speak past the lump of gratitude in her throat. She thought of that desperate day 5 years ago when she had returned from the doctor's office, convinced that her dream of motherhood was forever lost. How could she have known then that emptiness would eventually be filled in ways she could never have imagined? The garden, which Henry had built as a gift to heal her broken heart, had become so much more a source of sustenance, yes, but also of purpose, community, and ultimately, family. In its fertile soil, they had grown not just plants but relationships, opportunities, a new understanding of what it meant to nurture life. "Mama, come see what I found," Emma called, running toward her with something cupped carefully in her small hands. As Sophia knelt to examine her youngest child's discovery, a tiny lizard egg, perfectly formed and waiting to hatch, she sent a silent prayer of gratitude to whatever force had guided Henry's hands when he first began digging in the hard desert soil, creating a space where all manner of things could grow and thrive. In the years that followed, the foster garden, as it came to be known throughout the territory, continued to expand and evolve. They added beehives for pollination and honey, a small orchard of drought-resistant fruit trees, and even a pond fed by the underground spring that had saved them during the drought. Their family grew as well, with the addition of twin boys, orphaned Apache children whose parents had been killed in a territorial dispute. At 10 years old, Joseph and James were initially withdrawn and suspicious, speaking little English and expecting hostility from their new white family. But the garden worked its magic on them too, providing a common language of growth and care that transcended cultural differences. Samuel Walker remained a fixture in Bentonville, though his initial animosity toward the Fosters gradually gave way to a grudging respect. When a particularly harsh winter in 1886 killed many of his cattle, it was the Foster garden that provided food for his remaining ranch hands until spring arrived. The old cattleman never acknowledged the debt explicitly, but the threatening presence of his men on the ridgeline above their property ceased from that day forward. As their children grew into teenagers and young adults, the garden's influence spread throughout the territory. Sarah, now 18 and preparing to attend the Teachers College in Phoenix, had already published a small handbook on desert gardening techniques. Thomas, at 16, had designed irrigation systems for several neighboring properties. Emma, 12 and precocious, knew more about the medicinal properties of desert plants than many practicing physicians. And the twins, Joseph and James, now 15, had successfully integrated traditional Apache growing methods into the garden, further enhancing its productivity. On a warm summer evening in 1890, as Sophia and Henry sat on the porch of their expanded home, watching the sun set over their thriving homestead, Henry reached for his wife's hand, a gesture that had become as natural as breathing over their 17 years of marriage. "Do you remember that day I started digging the garden?" he asked, his voice soft with reminiscence. "You thought I was crazy trying to grow things in this desert," Sophia smiled, squeezing his hand. "I thought a lot of things back then. I thought my life was over because I couldn't have a child. I thought nothing would ever grow here. I thought my heart would always feel as empty as my womb." She looked out over the garden, where their 5 children were engaged in the evening harvest, their laughter floating on the warm air. "I've never been so happy to be wrong." Henry's arm came around her shoulders, pulling her close against his side. At 43, his hair was beginning to silver at the temples, and lines of hard work and laughter framed his eyes. To Sophia, he had never been more handsome. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "I had no idea what I was starting when I put that first shovel in the ground. I just wanted to see you smile again." Sophia leaned up to kiss his weathered cheek. "And now look what you've grown, Henry Foster, a garden, a family, a legacy." As darkness fell, their children joined them on the porch, arms full of fresh vegetables and flowers. Sarah arranged the blooms in a vase while Thomas and the twins carried in the harvest. Emma climbed into Sophia's lap, though she was really getting too big for such things, and pointed to the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. "Mama," she said sleepily, "do you think there are gardens in heaven?" Sophia smoothed her daughter's hair, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "I think heaven is probably very much like a garden," she answered finally, "a place where all kinds of beautiful things grow together." Henry's eyes met hers over their daughter's head, filled with the same love and understanding that had sustained them through drought and plenty, through sorrow and joy. In that moment, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she had found her heaven right here on earth in this garden, with these children, beside this man who had shown her that there were many ways to create a family, many kinds of seeds to plant, many forms of growth to nurture and celebrate. And she was grateful, so very grateful, for every single one.